Sarah Crawford remembered that sunny March afternoon perfectly. The air conditioning carried the distinct, sterile scent of hospital-grade disinfectants. As she walked down the long corridor of the medical center, nurses respectfully made way for her, offering quiet greetings. "Good afternoon, Dr. Crawford." She nodded back with a warm smile. In her left hand, she carried a lavish, 5-tier fondant cake ordered for her daughter's birthday. At the very top sat a hand-sculpted mermaid, exactly what her daughter had been talking about nonstop for a month. In her right hand was a gift bag. Inside was a custom-made silver tie clip that had taken 3 weeks to craft. Engraved on the back was a monogram of their initials, S and D, a gift for their 6th wedding anniversary. She had wanted to surprise him, arriving half an hour early so they could drive together to his parents' estate in the Hamptons. The elevator hummed as it reached the 17th floor, the executive suite where the chief medical officer's office was located. The hallway was surprisingly quiet. The executive assistant's desk was empty. She must have left early. Sarah was wearing soft-soled flats, making her footsteps against the marble floor almost completely silent. As she approached the office door, she noticed it was slightly ajar. From inside came a low, flirtatious female voice with a languid tone. "Can't you just come back a little later? You promised last time, and you lied again." Sarah's hand froze, hovering over the door handle. She pulled it back. Then came the velvety voice of David Vance, her husband, filled with a tenderness she hadn't heard in all 6 years of their marriage. "Listen. Be a good girl. Today is my daughter's birthday. The old man is watching. I have to go back and play the role of the good dad. And I..." The girl's voice pitched an octave higher, feigning offense. "You always leave me here alone." David interrupted, his tone exactly like one would use to soothe a petulant cat. "Tomorrow, I'll cancel my panel at the medical symposium, and I'll take you to that exclusive club you've been trying to get into. You want to go to that exhibition? I'll endure your modern art with you. Wherever you want." Through the crack in the door, a sliver of light spilled into the hallway. In that sliver, Sarah saw an elegant forearm wrapping around David's navy blue suit jacket. The nails were painted in the season's trendiest terracotta shade. Madison, his 6-year-old, executive assistant. At last year's corporate gala, Sarah had even covered for her when she'd had a bit too much to drink. She watched as David's hand rested on that forearm, not to push it away, but to pat it, soothingly, like a lover. Sarah didn't push the door open. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, she managed to do one thing. She pulled out her iPhone, opened the Voice Memos app, hit record, and pointed the microphone toward the crack in the door. She recorded a full 14 seconds. That was enough. Play the role of the good dad. Those 7 words acted like a scalpel, cleanly slicing open the reality of her 6-year marriage. It turned out all those trips to the amusement park with their daughter, the family dinners where he would raise a glass of wine and say, "My wife is pure gold. Thank you for everything," and even the framed family photo on his nightstand, it was all a performance. She looked down at the cake in her left hand. The fondant mermaid had shiny little eyes. Her daughter had specifically asked for a blue tail, and Sarah had driven to 3 different bakeries in Boston to find the exact right shade. This was for her daughter, not for him. Sarah carefully shifted the cake to her right hand, then used her left to open the gift bag. She pulled out the tie clip. The cold gleam of silver caught the fluorescent hallway light. She looked at the S&D engraving and suddenly felt a wave of physical nausea rising from the pit of her stomach. At the end of the corridor stood a yellow biohazard bin, specifically for contaminated medical waste that couldn't be recycled. She walked over, stepped on the pedal to open the lid, and dropped the tie clip inside. The metal hit the plastic bottom with a hollow clack, sounding almost like a sigh. Then, Sarah took out her phone and sent David an iMessage. "Stuck in brutal traffic. I'm going to pick up Lily and head straight to your parents' estate. Wrap up your work and meet us there." The tone was sweet, the words caring. She was, as always, playing the role of the understanding CMO's wife. After sending the text, she closed the thread and found another contact. Andy Walker, her old college friend, who was now one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in Massachusetts. She typed just 3 words. "Got a minute? Urgent." 3 seconds later, the reply came, "Always." Sarah slipped the phone into her trench coat pocket and, carrying the cake, headed back to the elevator. Passing the nurse's station, she caught the eye of a young triage nurse who smiled warmly. "Dr. Crawford, you look stunning today." "Happy birthday to Lily." "Thank you." Sarah smiled back. Her voice was as smooth and unrippled as a glass lake. As the elevator doors slid shut, she caught her reflection in the mirrored steel. Flawless makeup. A deep, classic lip color. Not a hair out of place. Only she knew that inside her coat pocket, her hand was clenched into a fist, so tight her nails were digging into her palm, not from pain, but from sheer, restrained effort. And what she was restraining wasn't grief. It was a searing, explosive clarity. This clarity was telling her, do not make a scene right now. Not on his turf. Do not engage in a battle with his rules, where you are guaranteed to lose. You have more important things to do. For example, throwing her daughter a perfect 5th birthday party. For example, finding out exactly how many other performances he had staged behind her back over the last 6 years. And, for example, while he still thought she knew nothing, systematically taking back everything that belonged to her, piece by piece. In the parking garage, Sarah found her SUV and placed the cake securely on the passenger seat. The fondant mermaid tilted slightly. She gently righted it. "Mommy is going to give you a wonderful party today," she whispered into the empty car, a promise to her daughter, and perhaps to herself. She started the engine, but she didn't drive toward the Hamptons estate. She drove to the Ritz-Carlton, booked a family suite, and asked the concierge to have it decorated in an ocean theme. On her instructions, the nanny had already picked Lily up from the estate under the pretense that Mommy had a special surprise planned in the city. When David Vance pushed open the heavy oak doors of his family's estate, the grand living room was brightly lit. His entire extended family was seated around the massive dining table, but next to the seat of honor where he was supposed to sit, the chairs for his wife and daughter were empty. There weren't even plates set out for them, as if they had never been part of the family plan. "Where is Sarah?" His father, William Vance Sr., set down his crystal whiskey glass. Displeasure was etched deeply into the wrinkles of his face. David froze for 3 seconds. He instinctively reached for his phone. Sarah's location on Find My was disabled. He dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Phone off. I'll call her. His voice wavered slightly. He stepped out into the foyer. By the time he dialed for the 3rd time, his hands had begun to shake. Not from panic, but from an inexplicable, creeping chill rising up his spine. Sarah never turned off her phone. In 6 years of marriage, she had always been reachable. Whether it was 3:00 a.m. or right after a grueling lab session, she always answered. And now, the person who was always there had simply vanished. This was 1,000 times more terrifying than any screaming match. He remembered her text from half an hour ago. Stuck in brutal traffic. "I'm going to pick up Lily and head straight to your parents' estate." But Lily wasn't here either. The nanny's phone was also off. In the inner pocket of David's bespoke suit rested a velvet Cartier box containing a diamond necklace. He had planned to present it to Sarah tonight in front of everyone. It was a mandatory scene in the script of The Good Husband, but his co-star hadn't shown up. He stood in the hallway of his childhood home, wearing a $5,000 suit, clutching a dead phone, suddenly feeling unbearably cold. At that exact moment, in the family suite at the Ritz, Lily was sitting on Sarah's lap. Her tiny hands grasped a slice of cake with the fondant mermaid, her face happily smeared with frosting. "Mommy, her tail really is blue." "Yes, baby, the color of the deep ocean." Sarah hugged her daughter. Her voice was soft as cotton. "What about Daddy?" "Daddy isn't coming." Sarah's hand paused for a fraction of a second. She leaned down and kissed the top of Lily's head. "Daddy is very busy at work today. We'll see him tomorrow." "Okay." Lily was easily distracted by a new toy. At 5 years old, children don't yet understand what a lie is. Sarah stared at her daughter's profile. She could see traces of David in the slope of her nose. She suddenly remembered the phrase, "Play the role of the good dad." The wave of nausea returned to her stomach. She stood up and walked into the lavish marble bathroom, turning on the cold water and holding her wrists under the stream. The woman in the mirror stared back at her. Her eyes were slightly red, but there was not a single tear. "Don't you dare cry," Sarah told her reflection. "If you cry, you lose. Not to him. To yourself. She dried her hands, took out her phone, and sent a voice memo to Andy. Her tone was completely flat, as if she were reading a lab report. Andy, David is cheating on me. With his assistant, Madison, I have an audio recording. I need you to do 3 things. First, run a forensic check on his accounts. Second, help me clarify the exact legal status of the patent rights for Prodavir. 1. Third, prepare all the paperwork for a divorce. The faster, the better. After hitting send, she typed a quick follow-up text. P.S. Do not spook him yet. He doesn't know that I know. Andy instantly replied with a thumbs-up reaction, followed by a text. Sarah, your cold-bloodedness is terrifying, but it's the right move. In divorces like this, it's not about how fast you start the screaming match. It's about how many trump cards you manage to hide up your sleeve before it begins. Sarah read the message and locked her phone. She walked back into the bedroom. Her daughter had already fallen asleep, clutching a plush mermaid toy. There was a smudge of frosting at the corner of her mouth. Sarah gently wiped it away, pulled the duvet over her, and sat beside the bed for a long time. The room was silent. Outside the window stretched the nighttime skyline of Boston, glittering with lights that never truly went out. Leaning against the headboard, Sarah began to mentally inventory her trump cards. Card number 1, Prodavir 1, the flagship targeted oncology drug of their medical corporation, currently in Phase 3 clinical trials. The development of this drug, from inception to its current stage, had been entirely under her direction, and the core molecular formula was her personal intellectual property. When they got married, David had convinced her to transfer the patent as a technological capital contribution to the company. But there was a clause in the shareholder, prenuptial agreement that she had insisted upon. In the event of the dissolution of the marriage, the technological contribution may be revoked without condition. David had laughed when he signed it, saying, "We're never getting divorced." Card number 2, herself. Dr. Sarah Crawford, 32 years old, PhD. In pharmaceutics, a protege of one of the top researchers at MIT, author of 6 groundbreaking papers in top-tier international medical journals. Vance Medical had grown from a regional clinic into a publicly traded corporation, not because of the charming face of CMO David Vance, but because of the formulas in her hands. Card number 3. William Vance Sr., David's father. The old man was shrewd and valued, legacy, reputation, and family above all else. Lily was his only granddaughter, the light of his life. If David lost his wife and daughter, it would be the ultimate, unforgivable sin in his father's eyes. Were these cards enough? Sarah closed her eyes. Yes, they were enough. But she wasn't going to rush. She remembered the words of her PhD advisor. The most dangerous thing in an experiment is drawing a conclusion before gathering sufficient data. So she would wait. Wait for him to keep playing his role. Wait for him to make more mistakes. Wait until she had cut off every single one of his escape routes. And only then would she be the one to rip off his mask. That night, David called Sarah 23 times between 9:00 p.m. and 1:00 a.m. Every call went to voicemail. He even drove to her parents' house in the suburbs. Her father answered the door and said, "Sarah wasn't there. Did something happen? Did you two fight?" No. David forced a picture-perfect smile. Her phone must have died. I'll keep looking. Back in his car, he loosened his tie and slammed his fist against the steering wheel. The scene in his office kept replaying in his head. Madison hanging off him. Had he closed the door all the way when he said all those things? He thought so. He remembered letting the rest of the executive floor go home early. So why had Sarah vanished? Coincidence? Impossible. Yet, he rejected the worst-case scenario. Sarah wasn't like that. She was gentle, compliant, completely absorbed in her family and her lab. Even when he occasionally came home late, she just warmed up his dinner and waited, never asking probing questions. She couldn't possibly know. Clinging to that self-delusion, David spent a sleepless night. The next morning, he received a text from Sarah. The tone, as always, was soft. Lily suddenly decided she wanted to stay in an ocean-themed hotel room yesterday. I made a spontaneous decision to take her. My phone died. Just saw your missed calls. I'm so sorry we missed dinner with your parents. I already called your dad to apologize. David stared at the message for 3 minutes. Every word was normal. The tone was normal, the punctuation was normal, but something felt off. It was like a perfectly smooth, sheer wall, so smooth there was nothing to grasp, and that in itself made it suspicious. But he quickly suppressed his anxiety, because a moment later, Sarah sent a photo. Lily, wearing a mermaid costume, flashing a peace sign at the camera, with the ocean-themed hotel wallpaper in the background. Sarah's face wasn't in the photo. David replied with a heart emoji and typed, "You're the best wife. I'll come pick you both up at lunch." A short reply came back. Okay. In the hotel room, Sarah stared at the heart emoji on her screen. The corners of her mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. It was muscle inertia, a conditioned reflex. He shows affection, she responds. This loop had repeated for 6 years and had become second nature. But starting today, the loop was broken. She closed the messaging app and opened an encrypted cloud folder. Inside was yesterday's 1-4-second audio recording and a list of documents she had compiled overnight. An inventory of their joint assets, the corporate shareholder structure, scans of property deeds, and a formal request for David's bank statements over the last 3 years. What are scientists best at? Gathering data, building models, and delivering lethal, undeniable conclusions. Sarah set the phone down and looked out the window. It was a foggy morning in Boston. She suddenly realized why she hadn't pushed the door open yesterday. It wasn't out of cowardice or shock. And it certainly wasn't because she still loved him and didn't want to be hurt. It was because she understood the dynamics too well. The moment she opened that door, she would lose the initiative. He would start apologizing, comforting her, putting on a show, deploying his entire arsenal of corporate crisis management. After all, he was the CEO, the emperor who had flawlessly played the good husband for 6 years. And what if she cried? Screamed? Threw a tantrum? She would be reduced to an irrational, hysterical woman fodder for gossip in his elite family, giving him the perfect excuse to kick her out without a dime. No. She wasn't going to play his game. She was going to design a new one, a game David wouldn't even realize he was playing until it was over. A meticulously planned experiment, governed by her rules. Subject of the experiment, David Vance. Objective: strip him of everything he had stolen from her. Duration: TBD. Endpoint: the day of his total ruin. Sarah pulled back the curtains. The morning light flooded the room, illuminating her silhouette. She took a deep breath and walked into the bathroom. Time to put on her makeup. David would be here at lunch. She needed her face to be as perfect and placid as always. Who said he was the only one who knew how to act? She wasn't just playing the role of a good wife anymore. She was performing the final, gentle farewell before the curtain fell. For the next 3 days, Sarah's life seemed entirely unchanged. She arrived at the lab on time, picked up Lily from kindergarten on time, and cooked dinner on time. When David came home, his favorite grilled salmon was waiting on the table. She even asked if he wanted her to pack him a lunch for the next day. Everything was as usual, perfect, like a well-wound clock. But in the shadows he couldn't see, the gears were already spinning in reverse. The results of Andy's forensic investigation arrived on the evening of the 3rd day. An encrypted email. The subject line was one word. Look. Sarah locked her home office door and opened her laptop. Before her were David's bank statements. Over the last 2 years, under the guise of research grants, he had transferred a total of $200,000 to an account belonging to Madison. The pretexts varied: academic stipends, travel expenses, fees for editing research papers. Each transfer was accompanied by forged invoices. Furthermore, a luxury condo in the Seaport district was registered in Madison's name. The down payment had come from David's personal line of credit. Sarah stared at the address for a long time. Seaport Residences. She knew the building. Last year, when she had suggested they buy a larger investment property there, David had claimed the market there was inflated and it was a bad investment. Turns out, it wasn't a bad investment. It was just an investment meant for someone else. She slowly closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. From the hallway, David's voice drifted through the door. Sarah? I just got out of the shower. Your light is still on. Working on the paper? Yes, almost done. Her voice carried through the wood, soft and steady. Go to sleep. Don't wait up. His footsteps retreated. Sarah sat in the dark, not turning on the desk lamp. Her hands rested in her lap, her fingertips ice cold. $200,000 and a luxury condo pulled from their joint marital assets. Legally, this was considered dissipation of marital property. In a divorce, she could demand full restitution and use it to leverage a massive share of the estate. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that if it came to light that funds earmarked for corporate research grants were used for personal affairs, this was no longer a civil dispute. It was corporate embezzlement, an SEC violation. A federal crime. Sarah didn't smile, and she didn't cry. She just sat in the dark for a long time. Then, she sent a reply to Andy. Keep digging. Don't stop. I need all the data before I initiate the final experiment. Andy's second report came a week later, this time not via email. He delivered it in person. He arranged to meet Sarah at an ultra-exclusive, members-only club in Beacon Hill. Their private room had no cameras, and even the waiters weren't allowed to enter. Sit down before you look at this, Sarah. Andy pushed a thick manila folder toward her. Sarah opened it. Inside was a stack of bank statements 3 times thicker than the last, along with several photographs. David and Madison in various locations. The pictures spanned the last year and a half. Photos from a private screening room, from the balcony of the Seaport condo, and one where Madison, in a silk slip, leaned against David's shoulder on a hotel balcony. On some tropical island. Last August. He told me he was flying to Tokyo for a global pharma conference. Sarah's voice was flat, as if noting an anomaly in lab results. Turns out, he took her to the Maldives. Yeah. Andy lit a cigar. He rarely smoked unless he was stressed. Sarah, there's something else. I found out that 3 months ago, Madison visited an OB-GYN. Sarah raised her eyes to look at him. I'm not certain if it was David's, but the timeline lines up perfectly. She didn't carry it to term. It was a miscarriage. But under the emergency contact section of her intake form, it lists David. A long silence settled over the room. Sarah meticulously placed the photos back into the folder, one by one. Her movements were precise, like a technician handling delicate lab samples. Her face betrayed no intense emotion, but Andy noticed that the fingertips gripping the photos had turned stark white. The nails left pale crescent indentations on her skin. Are you okay? Andy asked quietly. I was just thinking, Sarah began, her voice remarkably stable. When he signed that emergency consent form, I was in the lab, finalizing the data for the Phase 3 trials of Protavir. 1. I worked 47 days straight without a weekend. I lost 10 pounds. He even specifically asked our housekeeper to make chicken soup and bring it to the lab for me. He told me, Darling, you're working too hard. Don't burn yourself out. She let out a dry, hollow laugh. The sound sent a chill down Andy's spine. You see what a brilliant actor he is? Sarah said. So brilliant that I almost believed I had married a real man, instead of an expertly crafted mannequin. Andy put out his cigar and leaned forward. So what are you going to do now? I have all the materials ready. We can file the petition tomorrow. Sarah shook her head. That's not enough. What? Just divorcing him, taking half, and ruining his reputation for a few news cycles. That's not enough? Sarah looked up. Her eyes were dark and utterly calm, like an oceanic abyss where no light penetrates. He built a publicly traded empire on the back of my patent. He paraded my achievements in academic circles as his own. He made me believe I was just a fragile housewife who needed his protection, while he spent a year and a half funding another woman behind my back. This isn't something a simple, I'm sorry, or a standard divorce settlement can fix. Then what do you want? I want him to fall from the absolute highest peak. Sarah's voice was as quiet as a whisper. And I want him to be the one who pushes himself off the ledge. Andy stared at her for 5 seconds. Then he slowly leaned back in his leather chair and smiled. All right. Then we play the long game. How much time do you need? 2 months, Sarah said. The final Phase 3 trial results for Protavir, one will be certified early next month. And in exactly 2 months, Vance Medical is hosting its 30th anniversary gala. I want to give him his grand finale there, in front of everyone, Andy raised his scotch glass and gently clinked it against Sarah's untouched water glass. To a successful finale, then. Sarah didn't acknowledge the toast. She zipped the folder into her tote bag. The sound of the zipper was sharp, like evidence being sealed in an evidence bag. Andy. She paused at the door. For the near future, I might have to keep acting, playing the clueless, devoted wife. But keep an eye on one thing for me. See if Madison tries to figure out my schedule. You're worried she'll come confront you? I'm not worried. Sarah opened the door. I'm worried she won't. The day she comes to see me is the day I get my best opening. Sarah's hypothesis was validated with the precision of a calibrated instrument. On the third week, Madison finally made her move. It was 2:30 p.m. Sarah had just stepped out of the research facility. As she approached the parking garage, a figure in a beige cashmere coat stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. Madison was in full makeup, wearing a striking red lipstick. She stood near Sarah's SUV, her eyes red and her nose slightly puffy, looking as though she had just been crying. But she was crying aesthetically, that calculated kind of weeping that never ruins mascara. Dr. Crawford, Madison called out. Her voice was thin and trembling. Sarah stopped and looked at her. Her expression was completely neutral. No shock, no fury. Just the look one gives a stranger on the street. Madison. She frowned slightly. What are you doing here? Did something happen? Madison bit her lip and lowered her head. She had clearly rehearsed this posture many times. Tilting the head just so. Exposing the vulnerable line of the neck to trigger an instinctive desire to protect. Dr. Crawford, I know I shouldn't have come, but I feel so awful. Her voice broke. What's going on between me and David? I never wanted to fight with you. I love him so much I can't control myself. I love him so much I can't control myself. Sarah mentally translated the phrase, I am sleeping with your husband, but please don't be mad, because it's in the name of love. She almost wanted to laugh. And what exactly did you come here to tell me? Sarah's tone wasn't cold, nor was it warm. It sounded like she was asking an intern about the progress of an assay. I want to beg you. Madison looked up, eyes brimming with tears. Please let him go. He's so miserable at home. His father is so demanding. You expect so much of him. He's suffocating. I don't want to take your place. I just want someone to be there for him when he's exhausted. Sarah listened to this entire monologue and remained silent for 3 seconds. Then, a soft smile appeared on her face. The smile was measured, perfectly polite. It radiated a kind of aristocratic grace, a refusal to descend to her level. Madison, how old are you? 26. 26, Sarah nodded. When I was 26, I was in the lab doing the primary screening for small molecule targeted therapies. I worked 16 hours a day, 3 years without a vacation. That year, I published 2 papers in The Lancet, and the company's stock tripled. She paused, watching Madison's face begin to freeze. And what exactly are you doing with your 26 years? The question wasn't harsh. The tone was completely level, but the effect was like a soundless slap popping a heavily powdered soap bubble. Madison's face paled for a second, but she quickly scrambled to reclaim her pathetic victim persona. Dr. Crawford, I didn't come here to fight Madison, Sarah interrupted, opening her car door. Let me give you some advice. Garbage doesn't turn into treasure just because you hug it tightly. You're just getting yourself dirty. She got into the driver's seat and slammed the door. Through the tinted glass, she saw Madison standing there, face flushed dark red. Her lips were moving, but the words couldn't be heard. The carefully curated mask of the tragic victim had cracked, revealing a thin, ugly layer of pure hatred. Sarah started the engine and pulled out of the garage. In the rearview mirror, she caught one last glimpse of Madison, head down, furiously typing on her phone, complaining to someone, no doubt. To David, obviously. Let her, Sarah thought, complain. Tell him how his virtuous wife bullied his poor little kitten. Let him pity you. Let him feel he owes you compensation. Let him run further and deeper in the wrong direction, so deep he can never crawl out. This was what you call baiting the hook. And indeed, that evening, David was unusually attentive. He came home 2 hours early, bringing a box of Sarah's favorite pastries from a high-end bakery in the North End. Walking in, he intentionally softened his face and lowered his voice by half an octave. "Sarah, you didn't overwork yourself today, did you? You look a little pale." Sarah was at the kitchen island, reviewing some of Lily's drawings. She looked up at him and offered a faint smile. "I'm fine. Why are you home so early?" "Missed you." David placed the pastries on the counter and pulled a bouquet of white peonies from behind his back. Drove past the florist. "These are for you." White peonies. In the language of flowers. Sincere, romantic love. Sarah took the flowers and brought them to her face. The petals were cold, fresh from the florist's fridge. "Thank you," she said. Her voice carried the exact, perfectly calibrated amount of pleasant surprise. "Mommy, they're so pretty." "Daddy bought Mommy flowers." Lily clapped her hands, running into the kitchen. David knelt, hugged his daughter, and kissed her cheek. "And Daddy got you something too. A new 500-piece mermaid puzzle." "Yay!" Lily cheered. What an idyllic scene. A husband giving his wife flowers, a father bringing his daughter a gift. The family together, everyone happy. If anyone had peered through the window at that moment, they would have seen the picture of suburban perfection. But Sarah knew the true price of that bouquet. It was roughly equivalent to the psychological toll of him having to soothe Madison after their encounter that afternoon. "You insulted my girl, so I must be extra sweet to you to balance out the guilt if he had any guilt left to balance." She placed the flowers in a crystal vase. While at the sink, trimming the stems, the paring knife slipped and nicked her finger. A drop of blood slowly welled up, then fell onto a pristine white petal, red on white, like an omen. She pulled the blood-stained flower from the bunch and dropped it into the garbage disposal. Life continued in this strange, taut silence. During the day, Sarah worked in the lab on the final datasets for the Protavir 1 trials. This was her true work and her ultimate trump card. In the evenings, she still cooked dinner, played with her daughter, and exchanged mundane pleasantries with David. Sometimes, he would take phone calls in the bedroom, lowering his voice. She pretended not to hear. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, his phone screen would light up, and he would instantly flip it over. She pretended to be asleep. She even began to actively play into his hands. One evening, when David came out of the shower and sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling rapidly on his phone, Sarah stepped out of the bathroom just in time to see him quickly lock the screen. She deliberately walked up behind him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "Honey, you must be exhausted lately. You look worn out." David tensed for a fraction of a second, then habitually patted her hand. "It's nothing. We're just going through a major corporate audit at the clinic. Make sure you rest this weekend." Sarah's voice was right by his ear, gentle and intimate. "Don't push yourself too hard." David squeezed her hand. Behind his back, Sarah's lips curled into a smile. He couldn't see it. Look at him. Not an ounce of remorse. Conscience requires a soul. His soul had likely died the very first night he spent with Madison. All that was left was inertia. The inertia of maintaining appearances, the inertia of protecting his assets, and the inertia of wearing the mask of the good husband and father. In the 5th week, 1 month before the company's 30th anniversary, Gala Sarah's experiment entered its critical phase. That day, she drove to the lab as usual, but took the afternoon off. She drove alone to the financial district, parking beneath one of the most prestigious glass and steel skyscrapers in the city. When the elevator doors opened on the 67th floor, a man was standing by the panoramic window, his back to her. His dark gray suit fit flawlessly, tailored with the precision of a scalpel. He was tall, his posture perfectly straight. His hair was impeccably styled. His silhouette radiated the innate confidence of a man accustomed to being at the very top of the food chain. He turned around. "Dr. Crawford. Carter Sterling." Carter Sterling. The de facto kingmaker of Boston's financial sector. Founder and chairman of Sterling Capital. To the general public, his name was relatively unknown. He wasn't on flashy Forbes lists, didn't give interviews to CNBC, and avoided charity galas. But in business circles, everyone knew that if you needed billions moved or an empire dismantled, Carter was one of the 3 people the mayor had on speed dial. He was 35, unmarried. Rumor had it he had 0 romantic entanglements. His reputation was as spotless as a blank sheet of paper. Mr. Sterling, Sarah walked over and sat in the leather chair opposite his desk. Forgive the intrusion. When Andy recommended you, he said that if I wanted an absolute guarantee of security regarding my patent, you were the only option. Carter Sterling looked at her. He had light hazel eyes that, backlit by the window, looked cold and penetrating. But it wasn't the condescending coldness David possessed. It was the coldness of an equal, a grandmaster assessing another strong player on the chessboard. Dr. Crawford, he began, his voice deep and level. I read your white paper on Protavir. 1. Frankly speaking, the design of that molecular structure is at least 2 years ahead of anything else on the global market. The fact that you handed it over to Vance Medical as a capital contribution is a tragedy. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Are you saying I am saying? Carter leaned forward slightly, his tone unchanging. That if you decide to spin this technology off into an independent venture, I can provide you with a platform that will belong entirely to you. Not as an investor. As an equal partner, with no strings attached. Sarah stared at him. Carter didn't look away, nor did he rush to persuade her. He just sat there, calm and immovable as a cliff face. Why are you helping me? Sarah asked directly. Do you have a conflict with Vance Medical? Carter shook his head. Vance Medical is not worthy of being my competitor. The phrase was delivered completely flatly, without arrogance or contempt. Just a statement of fact. And in that flatness lay an overwhelming sense of power. David, who spent hundreds of thousands from a corporate fund to buy his mistress a condo, thought of himself as a titan. The man sitting across from her had recently spent $2 billion acquiring an entire pharmaceutical supply chain, and it hadn't even made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Different stratospheres. They simply weren't in the same league. Then why? Sarah pressed. Carter was silent for a couple of seconds before saying something she hadn't expected. When I was 5, my mother also dragged me out of a suffocating marriage. She had nothing back then except her own mind. His gaze shifted to the horizon beyond the glass. Later, she built Sterling Capital from the ground up to what it is today. I didn't just inherit a conglomerate. I inherited her mandate. Brilliant people should not wither away in unworthy relationships. Sarah said nothing. After a few seconds, she spoke. Mr. Sterling, I can accept your offer of partnership, but I have one condition. Until I officially sever ties with Vance Medical, any contact between us must remain strictly confidential. Only 3 people can know about this, including Andy. Understood? Carter nodded, sliding a letter of intent across the desk. I've already drafted a preliminary term sheet. Take it with you. If there are clauses you don't like, we will amend them. The timeline is up to you. Sarah picked up the document. A few crisp pages. Clear, concise, not a single wasted word. She quickly scanned it. Equal shares. Independent decision-making authority. A clear exit mechanism. Absolutely no clauses implying personal dependence. Mr. Sterling. She stood up. Your way of doing business reminds me of my lab protocols. Precise, clean, with no unnecessary variables. Carter, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly upward. It was likely the closest thing to a smile he was capable of. Dr. Crawford. He stood to walk her to the elevator. The Vance family pool is far too shallow for your ambitions. The elevator doors chimed and opened. Sarah stepped in and turned back to him. As the doors began to slowly slide shut, she said, It's not ambition, it's collecting damages. The doors closed. Leaning against the wall of the elevator, Sarah slipped the folder into her bag. Her heart was beating slightly faster than usual. Not because of Carter Sterling, though. She had to admit, objectively, he possessed qualities that could make a heart beat faster. It was because, as of today, her plan had something it had never had before. A safety net. An entirely secure, independent runway that had nothing to do with David. With this safety net, she was no longer a discarded wife. She was the one choosing to walk away. The difference between those two realities was vast enough to flip the entire chessboard. She arrived home that evening. Lily ran out of the living room and threw herself into Sarah's arms. Mommy, Mommy, Daddy said we're going to Six Flags this weekend. Is it true? Sarah scooped her daughter up and looked at David, who was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and flashed her a flawless smile. I promised Lily. You'll come too. The whole family. The whole family. Sarah mentally translated. My dad has been pressuring me lately to prove everything is fine at home. So I need a public, family-oriented photo op to check a box. Just like that day in the office. Playing the role of the good dad. Sounds perfect. She smiled back, setting Lily down. I'll go start dinner. Lily, what do you want? Shrimp. The big ones. Okay, I'll make garlic butter shrimp. She walked into the kitchen and put on her apron. The sound of running water masked all other noise. Under that cover, she pulled out her phone and texted Andy, Deal is struck with Sterling. The runway is clear. She deleted the message, locked the phone, and picked up a paring knife to devein the shrimp. Her movements were sharp and practiced. A single slit down the back, perfectly straight. The dark vein was removed and tossed into the trash cleanly, leaving no trace. Exactly like what she was doing right now. The trip to the amusement park happened that weekend. Lily sat on David's shoulders, chirping happily like a little bird. David took dozens of photos and uploaded them to his Instagram and LinkedIn with the caption, Perfect weekend with my girls. Number family first. Sarah stood nearby, watching him frame the shots. She suddenly felt he looked exactly like a highly efficient PR machine. Every curve of his smile, every angle of the photo, every hashtag, it was all calculated. He wasn't spending a weekend. He was generating content. Content about the devoted husband and father. This content would rack up likes and admiring comments. Colleagues would say, Dr. Vance is such a family man. Relatives would say, Sarah is so lucky. And the woman living in the seaport would see these photos, get jealous, cry, and call him demanding answers. And he would soothe her, saying, It's all for show. Both sides were his audience. Both were applauding his performance, while he stood in the spotlight, intoxicated by the illusion of absolute control. Sarah sat on a bench near the carousel. The sun warmed her face. She touched her coat pocket. The voice recorder was on. Today, while riding the carousel, David had taken a phone call, assuming the loud Calliope music would drown him out. He had spoken into the receiver. Baby, just endure it for one more day. I'll find an excuse to come over tonight. The recorder caught every word. Sarah tagged the file as Exhibit 17 and uploaded it to her encrypted cloud folder. 17 audio files. Every single piece of evidence spoken in his own voice. And they all proved one thing. This man's love was a mass-produced, assembly line product, packaged differently for different demographics. The version for his wife was labeled duty. The version for his mistress, passion. For his father, respect. For the public, image. None of it was real. Or rather, all of it was equally fake. Sarah leaned back against the bench and stared off into the distance. Lily spun around on the carousel, round and round. Her daughter's laughter pierced through the music and the crowd, clear and bright as breaking glass. For a fleeting moment, Sarah's eyes stung. Not for David. For the years, she had genuinely believed in this happiness. For Lily, who had no idea and thought the actor was the greatest dad in the world. Because one day, she would have to tell her daughter that mommy and daddy weren't together anymore. That day would be brutal, but not today. Today, she had to keep smiling, keep playing along, and when the show was finally over, she would take all the ticket revenue for herself. That evening after the park, David, exactly as expected, found an excuse to leave. An urgent emergency board meeting regarding a new acquisition. Sarah watched his taillights disappear around the bend of the driveway. Then, she drew the blinds and sat down at the computer in her home office. She opened the encrypted channel to Carter Sterling. The Phase 3 data for Protavir, one will be locked next week. I need to clarify one metric. If I revoke the IP license on the day of the gala, how hard will Vance Medical stock crash? Carter's reply came in 3 minutes. Written in his usual emotionless, clinically precise style, given Protavir, one's projected share of Vance Medical's future revenue, if you revoke the license and it goes public at the gala, trading will be halted on the NYSE by the end of the day. Within 72 hours, their market cap will hemorrhage upwards of $500 million. $500 million. Sarah stared at the number. So that was her price tag. The price of the woman her husband thought he could manage simply by playing the good dad. She slowly typed a response. I don't just want them to crash. I want David to be the one who pushes himself off the cliff right before the fall. Carter didn't ask for the details of the scheme. He simply replied with one word, "Understood." Then he added, "Dr. Crawford, if you require my involvement or leverage at any point, let me know. Any time. No strings attached." No strings attached. Sarah's eyes lingered on those words. David had never said no strings attached to her. Every favor he did had a price. "Look how much I take care of you," he loved to say. The subtext was always, "Therefore, you must obey me. Therefore, you must be grateful. Therefore, you must never embarrass me." And Carter, Sarah shook the thought away. Now was not the time to be distracted. She closed the comm channel and opened another file, the draft of a letter of intent she had been forging. Not a fake document, but a real contract with a fatal flaw. In the coming week, under the guise of wanting to save their marriage and being willing to compromise, she was going to offer David a highly lucrative settlement agreement. The core of the agreement: she would waive her right to contest the exclusive commercial rights to Protavir. 1. In exchange, David, in his personal capacity, would act as the sole financial guarantor for a new medical charity foundation called Safe Haven. At first glance, it looked like total submission. David would think he had won. He would think, well, women are weak in the end. Throw them a bone, pet their ego, and they'll sign anything. But buried deep within the bylaws of the Safe Haven Foundation was a clause that only a top-tier forensic financial lawyer would spot. A timeline trigger. If, within 180 days, any misappropriation or unauthorized transfer of funds is detected in the Foundation's accounts, all personal assets of the guarantor shall be subject to immediate judicial freeze and seizure. And knowing David's nature, keeping his hands out of a slush fund for 180 days was as impossible as a shark ignoring blood in the water. He would absolutely touch the money. He would do it because he always believed he was the smartest guy in the room. Sarah worked on refining the trap all night. When she finally saved the final PDF at 4:00 a.m., David's car had just pulled into the driveway. Hearing the heavy front door click shut, she quickly powered down the computer, slipped into the master bedroom, got into bed, and closed her eyes. He walked into the bedroom. He smelled faintly of someone else's perfume, not her usual Joe Malone. In the dark, he undressed silently, took a quick shower, dried his hair, and carefully slid into bed. He even put an arm around her shoulders, exactly as a good husband should. Sarah, keeping her eyes shut, felt the warmth of his arm. There was a time when that arm made her feel completely safe. Now it only induced revulsion. But she didn't flinch. Her breathing remained steady, like a clueless, deeply sleeping wife. Her acting skills were getting better and better. After all, she had a brilliant teacher who had been training her for 6 years. In the 6th week, Sarah initiated phase 2 of her plan. That evening, she deliberately came home an hour early. Taking off her shoes in the foyer, she heard David talking on the phone in his study. He was speaking very quietly, but she caught the key words. The old man. The inheritance? Divorce is out of the question. She didn't creep closer. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and turned on the loud exhaust fan above the stove. When David finished his call and walked out, he saw her back to him at the stove. She was wearing an apron, stirring broccoli in a pan. "You're home?" she asked over her shoulder, not turning around. "Yeah. Wrapped up early at the lab today. Tell Lily to wash her hands. Dinner's almost ready." David nodded and headed upstairs. In those few seconds, Sarah quickly typed a note on her phone, summarizing his call. She didn't know who he was talking to, but the words "divorce is out of the question" were enough to confirm one thing. David was terrified of a divorce. Not because he loved her, but because of the rules of his family. William Vance Sr. was old money New England. All his life he despised 2 things: disrespect to the family legacy and public infidelity. In his value system, a messy divorce was equal to moral bankruptcy, and moral bankruptcy meant being written out of the will. Although Vance Medical was a publicly traded company, the lion's share of the voting stock was still held in a family trust controlled by his father. The official transfer of power hadn't happened yet. This meant that everything David currently enjoyed: his CEO title, his board seat, the Hamptons house hung by the fragile thread of his father's approval. And having a virtuous wife and an adorable daughter was the main knot holding that thread together. Therefore, he couldn't divorce her. Not that he didn't want to. He didn't dare. When Sarah realized this, the corners of her lips twitched. She finally saw the entire board. David wanted perfect equilibrium. The wife and kid for his reputation, the mistress for his ego. He thought he was the grandmaster, and everyone else were pawns. He didn't know his most important pawn had already walked off the board and become a player. The next day, Sarah invited David to a high-end cafe near his corporate office. She chose a table by the window and ordered 2 Americanos. She wore a carefully calibrated expression of exhaustion mixed with hesitation. When David walked in and saw her face, his pupils contracted slightly. He sat down and, without a word, began analyzing her. "David," Sarah began, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Her fingers were slightly tense, playing the part of someone making a painful concession. "I want to talk to you." David's spine imperceptibly stiffened. "About what?" "About Protavir." 1. She looked up at him. Her gaze was steeped in manufactured surrender. "I've been thinking a lot lately. We've had our issues, but I don't want them to affect your career. You've invested so much in this launch, Sarah." David instinctively tried to cut her off, terrified she was about to drop the D word. Listen." Sarah stopped him with a gesture. Her voice was soft but firm. "I want to tell you that I'm willing to make concessions regarding the patent. The commercial rights to Protavir one can remain fully with Vance Medical. I won't contest the IP exclusivity." A flicker of disbelief flashed in David's eyes, like a poker player who had just been dealt an ace he didn't expect. But he quickly composed himself, furrowed his brow, and put on his mask of a sympathetic husband. "Sarah, you don't need to sacrifice your interests for me. That's not fair to you." "What a textbook line," Sarah mentally sneered. His "that's not fair" never meant he was refusing the advantage. It was merely polite friction before you placed the advantage directly into his palm. She continued, "Right on cue. But I have one condition. Namit, I want you, in your personal capacity, to act as the sole financial guarantor for a new medical charity initiative, the Safe Haven Foundation. The seed budget is small, 20 million is enough to start. I'll oversee the charitable operations, and you provide the formal executive oversight and the financial guarantee. It will be a new way for us to collaborate." She delivered the word collaborate with a hint of vulnerability, as if she were desperately using the charity to glue their crumbling marriage back together. David listened and instantly ran the math. 20 million was a drop in the bucket for him. Plus, a charitable foundation was phenomenal PR. It showed corporate social responsibility. His father would love it. And most importantly, Sarah was voluntarily waiving her right to revoke the IP for Protavir. 1. The literal lifeblood of the company's future stock valuation. Trading a $20 million pledge for a $500 million security blanket? Any idiot would take that deal. David barely hesitated. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Sarah, I agree. We're a family. There's nothing we can't figure out together." He squeezed her hand, absent-mindedly stroking the back of it with his thumb. Once upon a time, that gesture felt warm. Now, she remembered how those same fingers stroked Madison's neck. "Then I'll ask Andy to draft the agreement," Sarah said. "You can have your general counsel look it over, and if it's fine, we sign." Done. David was in an excellent mood. He ordered a slice of cheesecake and slid it toward her. "Eat something. You've lost weight." Sarah obediently broke off a piece and put it in her mouth. The cloying sweetness melted on her tongue. She swallowed, and her stomach turned sour. But she finished the bite with a smile. Back in her car, she finally allowed her facial muscles to relax. From the loving wife, setting back to lab technician. She texted Andy. He took the bait. Safe Haven is a go. Hide the 180-day trigger clause in Appendix C, around page 37. Drop the font size down a point. His corporate lawyers won't read a 3-7-page appendix word for word if the main IP waiver is ironclad. Andy replied, "You know him too well." Sarah didn't text back. The best way to know a man is to live with him for 6 years, only to wake up one day and realize that everything you knew was merely what he allowed you to see. What he hid was his true face. Now, it was her turn to hide. And she was much, much better at it. The contract was ready in a week. 43 pages of dense legalese. David's lawyers skimmed the macro structure, confirmed that the critical clause the plaintiff's waiver of IP revocation rights to Protavir, one was bulletproof, and advised David to sign. The signing took place in the CMO's office. Sarah stood beside him, watching him scrawl his signature. The fountain pen glided across the paper. David Vance. Done. He put the pen down and looked up at her with a smile. Do you feel better now? Yes, Sarah nodded, carefully sliding the contract into her portfolio. He had no idea that he hadn't just signed a guarantor agreement for a charity. He had signed the launch code for his own destruction. 180 days. The countdown started now. The Safe Haven Foundation was incorporated quickly. David delegated the day-to-day accounting to his CFO and only occasionally checked in. Sarah ostensibly only handled the charitable planning. But in reality, every time she logged into the system, she was preparing for a forensic audit. By the 8th week, the absence of the real Sarah began to subtly impact David's life. At first, he didn't notice, because Sarah was physically there cooking, doing the school run, attending galas on his arm. But something was evaporating. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly. For instance, his dress shirts were no longer pressed to absolute perfection. The housekeeper ironed them now. But how could she compare? Sarah knew that the collars on his Tom Ford shirts needed to be starched a half-inch higher, or they chafed his jawline. The housekeeper didn't know that. For instance, no one arranged the latest medical journals on his desk anymore. Before, prior to his weekly executive briefings, Sarah would print out all relevant papers, organize them, and highlight the key abstracts in yellow. Now, there was only a cold cup of water on his desk. For instance, no one was adjusting his father's hypertension medication in real time anymore. Sarah used to tweak the dosage every 2 weeks based on William Sr.'s lab results. Now, she just authorized the standard refills. No errors, but no precision either. These changes were so microscopic that David initially just felt a vague sense that things were off, without being able to pinpoint why. Until one evening, he stayed late in his study to work. He brewed a cup of Keurig coffee, bitter and flat, and suddenly remembered. Whenever he worked late, Sarah used to bring him a custom herbal tea blend she had formulated herself. It kept him alert but didn't cause insomnia. He hadn't seen that tea in weeks. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his texts with Sarah. Over the last month, the messages were sparse and purely functional. Lily drew a picture at school. Lily has ballet at 3 p.m. on Saturday. I uploaded your dad's blood work to the family portal. No, I miss you. No, come home soon. No, late night. Are you still awake? When did this start? David thought hard but couldn't identify the exact moment. Like a frog in slowly boiling water. She hadn't left abruptly. She was draining out of his life drop by drop, but he didn't have time to dwell on it because Madison had become increasingly demanding. The woman had somehow found out he had met Sarah for coffee and threw a massive fit. She accused him of trying to play both sides, of leading her on, she cried. She demanded promises. What promises? A promise to divorce? Impossible. He had to buy her off, again and again. A Birkin bag, a Cartier bracelet, dinner at Oya, every pacification cost money. Every expense drained his patience. He was getting exhausted. An exhaustion he had never anticipated. He was being ripped in two. On one side, a wife who no longer offered any warmth. She performed her duties, but not an ounce more, like a precision-engineered machine with the empathy module disabled. He couldn't fault her, but he felt the chill. On the other side, a mistress who was a bottomless pit, demanding more things, more time, more status, a black hole constantly expanding. David sat in his study, staring at the awful coffee. Behind him were shelves of medical texts. Suddenly, an inexplicable dread seized him. Not the fear that Sarah knew something he still believed his OPSEC was flawless. It was a deeper, primal dread. He felt like he was losing something, but it was so quiet he couldn't even describe what it was. Like waking up in the middle of the night to find the other side of the bed cold, but the indentation on the pillow was still there. The person is gone, but the heat hasn't entirely dissipated. It was scarier than a fight, because a fight means the person still cares. Silence means the departure has already begun. But David chalked the feeling up to corporate stress. He downed the bitter coffee, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. Sarah was already in bed, facing the wall, The duvet pulled up to her shoulders. Her breathing was even. He stood in the dark for a moment, then quietly slipped into bed. He didn't know that Sarah's eyes were wide open. She was staring at the faint pattern on the wallpaper. Her phone lay face down under her pillow. On it was the latest text from Andy. 3 suspicious wire transfers out of the safe haven accounts this week. Destination obscured via Shell LLCs. Total amount, $120,000. Authorized by his CFO. $120,000. He had started in week 3. Faster than she predicted. Sarah smiled soundlessly into the dark. She rolled over, feigning sleep movements. David sighed quietly behind her and wrapped his arm around her waist. She didn't pull away. Because very soon, that arm and that man would never be in her bed again. In the 10th week, exactly 3 weeks before the 30th anniversary gala, Sarah received an anonymous email. The sender address was a string of random characters, but the content made her frown. It was a screenshot. An internal Vance medical email thread where David was suggesting the board commission an independent audit of Dr. Crawford's research papers regarding Protavir. 1. Citing concerns over data integrity. He was preparing to accuse her of academic fraud. He was striking first. Sarah stared at the email for 2 minutes. She had guessed David wouldn't just sit on his hands. He probably didn't realize she was running an offensive yet, but his corporate survival instinct told him to neutralize threats. And his method was to destroy her scientific reputation. If her data was flagged as fraudulent, the IP ownership of Protavir, one would become legally muddy. Then, even if she tried to invoke the prenup to take the patent back, she'd be bogged down in years of litigation over contested data. It was a vicious, brilliant move. If she hadn't been prepared, it would have ruined her. But she was prepared. Sarah closed her email and dialed a number. "Mr. Sterling," she said. "I need to call in that favor." Carter Sterling's voice came through after 3 seconds, level as always. "Speak. David is preparing an internal motion to accuse me of academic fraud. I need a massive third-party entity completely independent of Vance Medical to conduct a public, transparent, and exhaustive audit of my Protavir, one data before he files his motion. The results must be unassailable. I need it done in a week." Silence on the line for 2 seconds. Then Carter said, 3 days. Sarah was taken aback. 3 days? My philanthropic wing, Sterling Medical Research, retains the rights to conduct independent peer reviews. The director of the board was actually one of the original peer reviewers for your most cited paper. He already knows your data is bulletproof. 3 days is plenty. Sarah gripped her phone. Her palms suddenly felt warm. Not from gratitude, she didn't allow herself such emotions right now, but from a novel, unfamiliar sensation. Someone was genuinely helping her, not for a corporate trade, not for control, but just because. "Dr. Crawford," Carter said suddenly on the other end. "Don't look back. Just keep looking forward." The call ended. Sarah lowered her phone and looked out the window. The Boston sky was darkening as twilight crept over the Charles River. She stood in her lab, surrounded by familiar centrifuges and reagents. These things had been with her for 10 years longer than that man, and far more honest. 3 days later, Sterling Medical Research published an official, heavily publicized forensic audit of the data. The conclusion was a single devastating sentence. The experimental data in the 6 foundational papers authored by Dr. Sarah Crawford concerning the targeted molecule Protavir, 1, are complete, reproducible, and show absolutely zero evidence of academic or scientific misconduct. The evening that report went live, David was sitting in his office, drafting the internal memo accusing her of fraud. His phone pinged with a news alert. Fierce Pharma, a major industry portal, had published the full text of the Sterling audit. He stared at the conclusion on his monitor. The color drained from his face, shifting from pale to a sickly ashen gray. Who leaked his plan? Who beat him to the punch? He couldn't comprehend it. But he understood one thing instantly. He could not send that memo. If a titan like Sterling Medical had already publicly verified Sarah's innocence, his accusation would look like malicious corporate slander. It wouldn't hurt her. It would expose him. David deleted the draft and slumped back in his chair, exhaling heavily. For the first time, he felt a tangible, looming threat emanating from Sarah. Not a hysterical threat. Not a threat of tears and thrown plates. But the kind of threat where you can't see the sniper, but you know the laser is already on your chest. It felt like swimming in deep water and suddenly feeling the current shift. Something massive was moving beneath him. 2 weeks remained until the Vance Medical 30th anniversary gala. David changed. Sarah felt it. He didn't become a better husband. He became paranoid and erratic. He started checking her schedule more often. One afternoon, returning from the lab, she found him in her home office, rifling through her desk drawers. "Looking for something?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. Her tone was as casual as if she were asking what he wanted for dinner. David spun around. He kept his face under control, flashing a practiced smile. "Looking for those preschool enrollment forms for Lily you printed out. The director said we missed a signature page. They're in the living room, bottom drawer of the credenza," Sarah said, and walked to the kitchen. She didn't call him out. The preschool forms had been submitted 3 months ago. He just needed an excuse to be in her office. What was he terrified of? What was he searching for? The answer was obvious. The Sterling medical audit had spooked him. He realized there were rogue variables in his equation, but he couldn't isolate them. He was used to absolute control, and the moment it cracked, his reflex was surveillance. But Sarah had anticipated this. Every vital document was stored in an encrypted offshore cloud server. The phone she used around the house was a clean burner. All communications with Andy and Carter went through an encrypted messaging app on a hidden device. He could tear the office to shreds and find nothing but old lab notes and Lily's crayon drawings. It was sterile. Let him search, she thought. The longer he finds nothing, the more anxious he'll get. And anxious men make sloppy mistakes. Sure enough, that same week, 2 more massive wire transfers hit the Safe Haven Foundation. This time, the amounts were staggering. $180,000, funneled as medical equipment procurement. Andy's forensic team quickly traced the recipient to an LLC registered in Delaware 3 months ago. The registered agent? Madison's cousin. When Sarah saw that report, she was in the lab, finalizing the hard drive backup of the Protavir 1 IP. She peeled off her latex gloves and looked at the numbers on her screen. The corners of her lips twitched. The 180. Day trap had snapped shut on day 63. His greed outpaced even her projections. She texted Andy 4 words. "Keep logging the transactions." Then she texted Carter. "I will need a seat at the gala." Carter's reply was a single word. "Done." 10 days before the gala, Sarah received an invitation in the mail from Vance Medical's PR department. Heavy cardstock, gold foil embossing, the 30th anniversary of Vance Medical, and the unveiling of our next-generation breakthrough. Her name was on the invitation, but not as the lead developer. She was listed as Mrs. David Vance, wife of the chief medical officer. Wife. 6 years ago, when she married him, Protavir, one was just a molecular sketch in her Moleskine notebook. She spent 4 years pulling all-nighters, running thousands of assays, surviving countless failures to push it to clinical trials. The company's stock had grown 7-fold since then. And her status at the Pinnacle event? Wife. Sarah tossed the invitation onto the coffee table. Her expression didn't change. Lily ran over, grabbed the shiny gold card, and inspected it. "Mommy, pretty. What is it?" "It's a ticket, sweetie." Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. "To where?" "To a very, very interesting show." Lily nodded, put the card down, and ran off to play. Watching her daughter's back, Sarah made a decision. Lily could not be in the city on the day of the gala. She needed to send her somewhere safe, far from the epicenter of the blast radius. She picked up her phone and called her mother. "Mom, can you take Lily next Saturday? I have a major corporate event." "Of course, bring her up." Her mother's voice was warm, asking no questions. After hanging up, Sarah did one more thing. She went to the back of her walk-in closet and pulled out a garment bag. Inside was a bespoke black sheath dress and a sharply tailored blazer with shoulders as precise as a blade. She had worn it 3 years ago to the International Pharmacology Congress in Geneva. She was the only keynote speaker to receive a standing ovation. Afterward, representatives from 6 global pharma giants had handed her their cards. She hadn't worn it since. David had told her, "You look too intimidating in that. Wear something softer to the family dinners, don't scare my dad." So she had smiled and changed into a beige A-line dress. Now, She took the black suit out and hung it up. She ran her palm over the fabric, smoothing out invisible wrinkles. The material gave a quiet shh, as if waking from a long sleep. The week of the gala, David stayed late at the office every night. He claimed he was polishing his keynote speech for the new drug unveiling. Sarah knew the truth. The so-called unveiling was just packaging the Phase 3 Protavir. One results in PR spin, claiming it as a triumph of Vance Medical's proprietary R&D. And then, under the spotlight, David would announce it, playing the dual role of CEO and visionary. Her name might appear on the final PowerPoint slide, under acknowledgements, in size 10 font. That was her role in the Vance family. Do the heaviest lifting, occupy the smallest space. But this year was going to be different. This year, there would be no acknowledgement slide, because the lead actor was about to be recast. 5 days before the gala, Sarah finished encrypting the final data packets in her lab. She gathered all original physical lab journals, logbooks, and hard drives. She made 3 copies. One went to her encrypted cloud, one to a secure vault at Sterling Medical, and one to Andy. Having done that, she stood in the center of the lab and looked around. This room had been hers for 6 years. From the first isolation of the target molecule to the massive, randomized, double-blind Phase 3 trials. Every breakthrough happened within these walls. Pinned to the corkboard was a crayon drawing a 2-year-old Lily had made, a stick figure in a white coat surrounded by colorful bubbles. Lily said it was mommy making medicine. Sarah unpinned the drawing and tucked it safely into her notebook. As of tomorrow, this lab would no longer belong to her. She had already drafted her resignation letter, dated for the day of the gala. When the dust settled, she would officially exit Vance Medical, citing a pivot in professional direction. But for now, the letter sat in her desk drawer. Timing was everything. The detonation had to happen on that stage, all at once. 3 days before the gala, a wild card appeared. Sarah was home that afternoon, packing a duffel bag for Lily's weekend at her grandmother's. Her phone buzzed. An unknown landline number. Dr. Crawford? Are you related to William Vance Sr.? Sarah's heart dropped. Yes, I'm his daughter-in-law. What happened? Mr. Vance suffered a severe myocardial infarction. He's currently in the ICU at Mass General. He's stable for now. But we need family here immediately to sign surgical consent forms. Sarah ran to her car. She made it to Mass General in 15 minutes, breaking several speed limits. By the time she arrived, William Sr. had been moved to a cardiac step-down unit. He lay there, his face ashen, nasal cannula delivering oxygen. He was conscious, but incredibly weak. When Sarah walked in, his cloudy eyes cleared for a moment. Sarah, you came. Dad. Don't try to speak. She instinctively grabbed his hand and quickly scanned the vitals on the monitor. The numbers were borderline, but the EKG wave looked ominous, a potential secondary stenosis. She frowned and turned to the attending cardiologist. Have you done a coronary angiography yet? The cardiologist, clearly aware of Sarah's formidable medical background, answered directly, Not yet. We were waiting for family consent. Mr. Vance insisted we wait for you. Do it now. Sarah signed the iPad form, then scrutinized his chart. She pointed to a specific medication. Swap this out for low molecular weight heparin Lovenox. Calculate the dose based on his weight. He's 180 pounds. And push 75 milligrams of Plavix immediately. The cardiologist didn't argue. He instantly relayed the orders to the charge nurse. Throughout all this, David was nowhere to be found. He burst into the room 40 minutes later. Jacket off, tie loosened, hair disheveled. He smelled faintly of alcohol, not the scotch of a business lunch, but red wine and a sweet, musky perfume that belonged neither to a hospital nor to his wife. Dad, he rushed to the bedside, his voice dripping with perfectly acted panic. What happened? I just saw the missed calls. William Sr. looked up from the bed. His gaze was heavy and dark, like water at the bottom of an abandoned well. I called you 11 times, the old man rasped. You didn't answer once. David's face dropped. He checked his phone. 11 missed calls between 4:00 and 4:30 p.m. Where was he? He was at the Seaport Residences. Madison had claimed she had a migraine and begged him to come over. He had put his phone on Do Not Disturb. I was in a board meeting, Closed doors, David lied smoothly, though his voice was dry. I left my phone at my desk. I just saw them. His father didn't call out the lie. He simply turned his head slowly, looking at Sarah for a long time. Sarah, he whispered, thank God you are here. The statement was quiet, but in that hospital room, it weighed a ton. It weighed so much that a crack appeared in David's facade. It was the hidden humiliation of a golden boy being unfavorably compared, exposed as inadequate by the patriarch. He stepped closer and grabbed his father's hand. Dad, I'm so sorry. It won't happen again. The old man closed his eyes and didn't reply. David stood awkwardly, maintaining the posture of a devoted son, but his eyes shifted to Sarah. He was trying to read her expression. Sarah just sat in the visitor's chair, reviewing the angiogram report the cardiologist had just airdropped to her tablet. Her profile was as serene as still water. She gave him absolutely zero data to interpret. This unsettled David even more. The old Sarah, the wife he had known for 6 years, how would she have reacted? She would have smoothed things over. She would have said, he's been working so hard on the launch, Dad, protecting him from his father's wrath. Her devotion was like a safety net that always caught him when he stumbled. But the net was gone. She just sat there, observing. A spectator. David's Adam's apple bobbed. He wanted to say something to break the suffocating silence, but his father kept his eyes shut, pretending to sleep. David had no choice but to step out into the hallway. He texted Madison, Dad had a heart attack. Won't be able to come by for the next few days. Madison instantly replied with a string of crying emojis, then asked, Oming, that's terrible. But what about the gala this weekend? Will you still be able to go? David stared at the text for 3 seconds. His father had just nearly died, and this woman's first instinct was to ask if he could still take her to the party. A flash of genuine disgust rose in his gut, but only for a second. He pushed it down and replied, Yes. When Sarah walked out of the room to get coffee, she saw him standing at the end of the hall, texting furiously. The blue light from the screen illuminated his face, dividing it into sharp shadows. She didn't approach. She just slowed her pace near the nurse's station. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed his left hand. The hand holding the phone was bare. He wasn't wearing his wedding ring. She hadn't noticed that morning, but now, in the middle of the night, in a corridor reeking of antiseptic while his father lay in the ICU, that bare ring finger was as glaring as an open wound. Sarah looked down at her own left hand. Platinum and a flawless diamond. Classic Cartier. He had slipped it onto her finger 6 years ago on one knee, saying, I will protect you for the rest of my life. Slowly, very slowly, she slid the ring off her finger. The movement was effortless, like brushing away a dead leaf. No hesitation. No regret. Just a profound sense of relief. Like finally ripping off a suffocating bandage. She dropped the ring into the pocket of her trench coat. A pale indentation remained on her skin, like a healing scar. It would fade. William Sr. remained in the hospital for 3 days. Every afternoon, Sarah spent 2 hours with him. She adjusted his meds, discussed rehab plans with the doctors, and even trimmed his nails. He had mild neuropathy from diabetes, making it dangerous for him to do it himself. The household staff wouldn't know those details. David, meanwhile, arrived late and left early. He always showed up 5 minutes before visiting hours ended, carrying a massive bouquet of white lilies. William Sr. was highly allergic to lily pollen. Sarah had known this since her first year in the family. David still couldn't remember. Every time David walked in with the flowers, Sarah silently picked them up and moved them out to the hallway desk. David noticed and finally asked, Why do you keep moving them? Your dad is severely allergic to the pollen, Sarah said flatly. David froze. Really? I didn't know. There's a lot you don't know, she thought. But her voice remained as unreadable as ever. David opened his mouth to defend himself, but shut it. On the third evening, as Sarah was tucking William Sr. in and preparing to leave, the old man suddenly grabbed her wrist. Sarah. His voice was weak, but his eyes were sharp. Not the eyes of an 80-year-old recovering from cardiac arrest, but of a corporate titan. Is something wrong between you and David? Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she projected a look of mild confusion. Dad, why would you ask that? I am old, but I am not blind. William Sr., his gaze cut like an old but perfectly honed knife. You look at him differently now. You used to have a light in your eyes when he walked in. Now? You look at him like he's a blank wall. Sarah remained silent for a few seconds. She could have kept acting. She could have said, "Everything is fine, we're just stressed with the new drug launch." He probably wouldn't have pressed the issue. But she didn't, because this old man, despite his arrogance, his demanding nature, and his ruthless business tactics, had treated her with genuine respect. For 6 years, his gruff affection for her hadn't been a performance. He remembered she loved certain French pastries and always had his driver pick them up for her. He knew she worked insane hours and ordered the estate chef to send her meals. At family gatherings, he introduced her as our brilliant Sarah, not David's wife. She didn't want to lie to him, but she couldn't tell him the truth right now. His heart couldn't take a second massive shock. Dad. Sarah crouched down so she was at eye level with him. Her voice was incredibly gentle. There are things I can't tell you right now, but I promise you one thing. No matter what happens, Lily will never be caught in the crossfire. I will always protect her. The old man stared at her. Swirling in his clouded eyes was a mixture of anger, sorrow, and the bitter realization of the inevitable. Slowly, he released her wrist, sank back into his pillows, and closed his eyes. I trust you. 3 simple, absolute words. They held more weight than all of David's vows over the last 6 years. Sarah stood up and adjusted his blanket. Her fingers lingered on his frail shoulder for a second, a silent goodbye. Then she quietly closed the door. The fluorescent lights buzzed in the hallway. She leaned against the wall and took 3 deep breaths. She touched the cold metal of the ring in her pocket. No warmth left. Her phone buzzed. A text from Carter Sterling. 1 line. Your seat for the gala is secured. Table 3, row 1. You are listed on the master manifest as an independent medical expert representing Sterling Capital, not as a +1. Sarah stared at the words under the harsh hospital lights. She felt no joy, no vindictive glee. Just a long-forgotten sense of dignity. Lyanaway. It felt like walking through a pitch-black tunnel for years, and suddenly someone turns on a flashlight, not shining it in her face to inspect her, but pointing it at the ground so she could see her path. She texted back 2 words. Thank you. Carter replied, don't mention it. Also, black suits you much better than beige. Sarah stopped walking. She hadn't told him about the dress she planned to wear. But he seemed to just know. He knew without overstepping, watching from a respectful distance. It wasn't surveillance. It was a steady, quiet attention. Like a deep ocean current invisible on the surface, but undeniably powerful and constant. She locked her phone and walked to the parking garage. Passing the ER, she saw a young couple walking out. The man was supporting a woman who had a bandage on her arm from an IV. He leaned down, whispered something in her ear, and she smiled, playfully shoving him. A normal scene. Sarah had moments like that once. Once, she had passed out in the lab from hypoglycemia. David had sprinted to the ER 20 minutes after getting the call. That was probably the only time he had been genuinely terrified. He took her home and personally peeled an apple for her to eat. But now, she questioned even that memory. Was that panic just part of the role? If Madison had called him at the exact same moment with a migraine, which hospital would he have driven to first? It doesn't matter anymore, Sarah thought, quickening her pace. She got home at 9:00 p.m. The house was empty. The nanny had taken Lily to her mother's house in the suburbs. David was presumably working late in the seaport. She sat alone on the living room sofa, leaving the main lights off. Only the motion sensor light in the foyer cast a warm yellow circle on the floor. On the coffee table, she laid out the items she had pulled from her bag, one by one. The discarded Cartier wedding ring, a notarized copy of the Safe Haven Foundation guarantor agreement bearing David's signature, a printed ledger of 17 audio recordings, cataloged by date, duration, and key quotes. The Delaware LLC incorporation papers linking the embezzled funds to Madison's cousin. The Sterling Medical Forensic Audit Report. And finally, the formal petition for divorce, drafted personally by Andy, outlining ruthless, uncompromising terms. Sarah looked at the spread, the way she checked the labels on her reagents before starting a massive synthesis. Concentrations verified, Expiration dates checked. Everything was in place. Nothing overlooked. She stood up, went to her walk-in closet, and unzipped the garment bag containing the black suit. She hung it on the hook by the full-length mirror, took a step back, and looked. The fabric absorbed the dim light, radiating a cold, velvety menace. The shoulders were razor-sharp, the waist cinched and exact. "It's been 3 years," she whispered, like greeting an old friend returning from war. She showered, washed her hair, and completed a meticulous skincare routine. As she applied hand cream, she inspected her nails. Perfectly manicured, natural, unpainted. She did all this with a profound sense of ritual. Not to make herself beautiful for someone else, but to achieve total internal alignment. A person about to execute a maneuver that will permanently alter the trajectory of their life must be in peak physical and mental form. To honor their own resolve. Late that night, David returned. Lying in bed, she heard the front door lock click, then the thud of his Ferragamo shoes hitting the floor. His footsteps crossed the living room and paused for 2 seconds near the coffee table. Sarah's heart spiked. She had forgotten to clear the documents off the table. But 3 seconds later, his footsteps continued toward the bathroom. The shower turned on. She slowly exhaled. The living room was dark. He probably hadn't noticed them, or assumed they were just her dense lab protocols. He never took an interest in her scientific work. The water stopped. The door opened. He slipped into the bedroom in the dark. The soft clinking of hangers meant he was picking out his bespoke suit for the gala tomorrow. Then he got into bed and, as always, draped his arm over her waist. Sarah didn't open her eyes, and she didn't flinch. One last time, she thought. After tomorrow, this hand will never touch me again. Good night, he whispered into the dark. Sarah didn't reply. She maintained the breathing rhythm of a sleeping human, 14 breaths, a minute, deep and even. David's hand lingered on her waist for a few seconds, then slowly retreated. He rolled over and fell asleep within minutes. His breathing was calm and untroubled, the sleep of a man who believes his empire is secure. Sarah opened her eyes in the pitch black. She stared at a faint water stain on the ceiling from a leak last winter. She remembered that day. A pipe had burst. She was alone, calling the plumber, moving heavy furniture, mopping the hardwood for an hour. David had claimed he was stuck at the clinic pulling a double shift. She had felt sorry for him, texting him, "I handled it. Don't worry, just focus on your patients." Now she knew the truth. That night, he was in the seaport, watching a movie with Madison, eating takeout, and sleeping over. The next day, he came home complaining of exhaustion from the double shift. She had made him a restorative soup. What a joke. Sarah pulled her gaze from the ceiling and looked at the sliver of street lamp light piercing the curtains. Dawn was approaching. Tomorrow was already here. She closed her eyes and issued one final command to her brain. Sleep. You need to be flawless. And she slept. Deeply, dreamlessly. Like a sharpened blade resting in its scabbard. Quiet but lethal. Her alarm went off at 7:00 a.m. The first thing Sarah did was look at the other side of the bed. Empty. David had already left for the hotel ballroom for the final AV rehearsals. The sheets on his side were still wrinkled. A shallow indent remained on his pillow. She stared at the indent for 2 seconds, then stood up and violently threw open the curtains. Harsh, brilliant morning sunlight flooded the room, instantly incinerating all the shadows. She took a deep breath and began to get ready. Skincare, makeup. She chose a 1-2 hour matte foundation. Today allowed for 0 errors. She drew her eyebrows slightly sharper than usual, the arch 0.5 millimeter higher, giving her face an intimidating severity. Then came the lipstick. A cold, classic, matte crimson. Not her usual soft nude. This was war paint. Then, she put on the black dress and blazer. When she looked in the mirror, an almost unrecognizable stranger stared back. Not the CMO's demure wife. Not the gentle mother baking cookies. Not the woman in an apron asking what he wanted for dinner. This was a razor-sharp scientist who held the fate of a multi-billion-dollar supply chain in her hands. The real Dr. Sarah Crawford. She had spent 6 years forcing herself into the mold of the perfect suburban wife, sanding down her edges, dulling her brilliance, until she had almost forgotten who she truly was. Now, she remembered. She stared at her reflection for a long time. Then she picked up the Cartier wedding ring from her vanity. The platinum flashed coldly in the sunlight. She placed it next to their framed wedding photo. In the picture, they were smiling so radiantly. The bride had the ring on her finger. Now, the ring was outside the frame, completely out of place, just as she was about to step completely out of the role assigned to her. Finally, she picked up her phone and texted Andy. "I'm heading out." Andy replied instantly. "Payload is secure. The AV tech will hand you the flash drive right when you arrive. You have your window at exactly the 40-minute mark of David's keynote. Godspeed." Sarah replied with one word. "Go." Then she opened her thread with Carter Sterling. She typed, hesitated, deleted, and retyped. Finally, she sent one sentence. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for today, regardless of the outcome." Carter's reply was swift. No corporate pleasantries, no generic good luck or you've got this. Those words were too lightweight for the execution she was about to perform. He wrote, "Execute." Sarah locked the phone and took one last look in the mirror. Red lips, black armor, eyes the color of a stormy sea. It was time. She grabbed her car keys, picked up the black leather portfolio containing the hard copies of the evidence, and walked out of the house. Her stilettos clicked sharply against the concrete of the garage. Every step was precise, deliberate, like a countdown, like the pulling back of a hammer on a revolver, like the first deep breath of oxygen after drowning for years. She started the engine and reversed out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, the sprawling colonial house where she had spent 6 years grew smaller and smaller, until it vanished entirely into the bright New England morning. She didn't look back once. The venue for the Vance Medical 30th Anniversary Gala was the Grand Ballroom of Boston's most opulent luxury hotel. By the time Sarah's SUV pulled up to the valet, a long line of executive black cars was already parked outside. S-Class Mercedes, Bentleys, the occasional understated custom-armored SUV. The owners of these vehicles represented the absolute apex of the East Coast medical, biotech, and financial elite. Today, they had all gathered to toast David Vance, or more accurately, to celebrate the impending FDA approval of Prodavir, 1. None of them realized that the true master of Prodavir, 1, was currently walking toward the entrance in a black suit and 4-inch heels. At the registration desk, the PR associate holding the iPad froze for a second when she approached. In the primary guest list, next to the name Sarah Crawford, was the tag Wife of CMO. But the striking, intimidating woman standing in front of him looked absolutely nothing like a trophy wife attending for photo ops. "Mrs. Vance." "Let me find your table at the front," the associate stammered. "Dr. Crawford," Sarah corrected smoothly. "My seat is at table 3, row 1. My invitation was issued under the capacity of an independent scientific expert. Please check the secondary manifest." The associate nervously swiped to the VIP list and found the entry added just 3 days ago. Dr. Sarah Crawford, special guest representing Sterling Medical Research. The authorization code was signed by the hotel's director of VIP services. "Ah, yes. Dr. Crawford. My deepest apologies. Please, go right in." The title shifted immediately, and his tone became 3 degrees more deferential. Sarah walked into the ballroom. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a glittering light over the room, like a captive galaxy. The round tables were draped in midnight blue velvet. In the center of each sat towering arrangements of white calla lilies. Vance Medical's corporate colors, blue and white, symbolizing innovation and purity. A massive LED wall spanned the stage, currently looping a slickly produced video covering the 30-year history of the company. Sarah appeared in the video exactly twice. Once in a wide shot of the lab, wearing a white coat and hunched over a mass spectrometer, occupying less than a quarter of the frame. The second time in a group photo, standing in the back row, her face half obscured by the graphic, "Our Industry, Leading R&D Team." Sarah glanced at the screen and looked away. It didn't matter. After today, everyone in this room would know exactly what she looked like. Table 3 was positioned perfectly, barely 30 feet from the center of the stage. As she sat down, she surveyed the room. Seated at her table and the adjacent ones were titans of the industry, deans of medical schools, hospital chiefs of staff, and CEOs of rival biotech firms. Several recognized Sarah. They looked surprised and whispered among themselves, but were quickly distracted by waiters offering champagne. Sarah didn't touch her glass. Her gaze swept over the crowd and locked onto the head table. The Vance family occupied it. The gold-embossed place card for David Vance, CEO, CMO, sat front and center. Right next to it was an empty chair, with a card reading Sarah Vance. That was supposed to be her seat. But today, she chose table 3. Not because she was barred from the front, but because she refused to exist as an appendage to his name ever again. She required her own name, her own seat, her own absolute authority. At 10:00 a.m., the gala formally began. David walked onto the stage. Sarah watched him. He was wearing the bespoke navy suit. She remembered that suit. Last year, she had gone with him to the tailor in Back Bay for the fittings. She had helped select the Italian wool, chosen the horn buttons, and explicitly told the tailor to bring the shoulders in by 1/4 inch so the silhouette was sharper. He was wearing the armor she had designed for him, standing on a stage to steal her life's work. The irony was almost poetic. David's opening remarks were flawless. His baritone voice projected the perfect blend of humility and supreme confidence, the hallmark of a young, visionary CEO. Polite applause rippled through the room at engineered intervals. For 30 years, Vance Medical has made it our mission to tackle the most impossible challenges facing human health. The massive screen shifted to a slide dedicated to Protavir. 1. A 3D render of the molecular structure rotated slowly. Sarah could have drawn that exact structure blindfolded. She had sketched it in her notebooks no less than 3,000 times. And today, it is my profound honor to announce that the Phase 3 clinical trials for Protavir, 1, have concluded with unprecedented success. David paused for effect. Every single primary endpoint was shattered. This means we are one step away from bringing this revolutionary oncology therapy to millions of desperate patients. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. David stood in the glare of the spotlights, soaking it in. In his eyes was a gleam Sarah knew intimately, the intoxicating, euphoric arrogance of a man who believes the world revolves around his axis. He continued speaking about the journey of Protavir. 1. Praising the team and the innovative culture at Vance Medical. His corporate speak expertly avoided naming a single specific scientist. He only used collective nouns. Our team. Our proprietary systems. As if Protavir, 1, had materialized out of thin air, without the blood, sweat, and 4 years of isolated agony of a specific human being. Sarah sat perfectly still, her face an unreadable mask. Her hand rested on her knee, fingers lightly brushing the leather of her portfolio. Not yet. Let him speak. Let him claim all the glory. Let him say the words proprietary in-house development as loudly as possible. Because the higher he climbs, the louder the crack when he hits the pavement. At exactly the 35-minute mark, David moved into his closing remarks. Finally, I want to take a moment to offer my deepest gratitude to one specific person. His eyes scanned the front row, looking toward the head table, expecting to find his demure wife so he could deliver a tear-jerking tribute to her unwavering domestic support. But when his eyes hit the head table, the chair was empty. His smile froze for a microsecond. His eyes rapidly swept the next few rows, panicking slightly. And then, he found her at table 3. She was sitting there, draped in black armor, with a blood-red lip. The stage lighting caught the sharp angle of her jaw, making her look severe, lethal, and entirely foreign. David's Adam's apple bobbed violently. At that precise second, his survival instinct screamed that something was catastrophically wrong. But the teleprompter kept scrolling, and the spotlights were blinding. He couldn't stop. I want to thank my family, and thank everyone who poured their soul into Protavir. 1, he rushed through the ending. Thank you all. More applause. David offered a slight bow and turned to exit the stage. At that exact moment, Sarah stood up. She moved smoothly, placing one hand on the table and grabbing the portfolio with the other. The sound of her chair sliding back was drowned out by the clapping, but the VIPs at the neighboring tables immediately noticed. A woman in stark black, radiating an almost visible aura of menace, walking deliberately toward the VIP stairs leading to the stage. Dr. Crawford? A Harvard Medical School dean whispered as she passed. Where are you going? Sarah didn't look at him. She gave a slight nod and kept walking. Her stilettos sank into the plush carpet, completely silent, like a panther closing the final distance to its prey. She reached the tech console hidden just off stage. A young AV technician wearing a headset saw her approach and smoothly handed her a thumb drive. It was Andy's guy. They exchanged a look that lasted a fraction of a second. The tech then seamlessly plugged the drive into the master control board routing to the LED wall. The entire handoff took 15 seconds. David had already descended the stairs and was standing near the head table, shaking hands with board members. His smile was back, the posture of a triumphant conqueror intact. He had no idea what was happening behind him. The MC stepped up to the podium. According to the run of show, this was the cue for a corporate sizzle reel, followed by champagne service. But the script had been hijacked. The MC looked down at a fresh index card that had just been shoved into his hand by the AV tech. He hesitated, looking off stage. Sarah, standing by the stairs, gave him a slow, authoritative nod. The MC cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude, we have a surprise addition to our program. Please welcome to the stage a special guest representing Sterling Medical Research and the sole original patent author of Protavir, 1, Dr. Sarah Crawford. The ballroom fell into a stunned silence. Then, a tidal wave of whispers swept across the room. Sole author? Sarah Crawford? Isn't that Vance's wife? The patent is hers? The champagne flute in David's hand stopped midair. He whipped his head toward the stage. Sarah had already stepped into the spotlight. As the blinding white light hit her, she didn't feel nervous, or furious, or even triumphant. She felt absolute, crystalline clarity. A profound sense of completion. She looked out over the sea of faces. Hundreds of eyes were locked onto her. Curious, confused, expectant, terrified. David's eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated horror. He had dropped his champagne glass onto the table with an ugly clatter. His lips were moving, likely mouthing the words, "Have you lost your mind?" Sarah didn't look at him. She addressed the room. Her voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, echoed into every corner of the grand ballroom. Crisp, resonant, without a single tremor. Esteemed colleagues, board members, guests, good morning. I am Dr. Sarah Crawford. I apologize for interrupting the celebratory mood, but there are certain facts regarding the foundation of this company that, if not stated publicly today, will be buried forever in corporate spin. She pressed the clicker in her hand. The LED screen behind her shifted. Slide 1. Intellectual property origin. Her academic credentials. The cover pages of her 6 peer-reviewed papers. A complete timeline of Protavir. 1's development. From initial molecular synthesis to phase 3. Every single milestone bore one name as the primary investigator, hers. The architectural design of the Protavir, 1 molecule, began in March 2019. Her voice was clinical, as if delivering a lecture at a symposium. Up until the commencement of phase 3 trials in 2023, the entire R&D pipeline was under my exclusive direction. The core structure, the targeted delivery mechanism, everything is derived entirely from my original proprietary research. This data has been forensically audited and verified by Sterling Medical Research. The report is publicly available as of 3 days ago. The whispers in the room escalated into an intense hum. The biotech analysts in the crowd were frantically pulling out iPads. Every metric she displayed was verifiable. Sarah clicked the remote again. Slide 2. The legal architecture. A scanned legal document appeared on the massive screen. The prenuptial and shareholder IP agreement. Highlighted in bright yellow was the fatal clause. Party B, S. Crawford, assigns the provisional commercial rights of the Protavir, 1 patent to Party A, Vance Medical, as a technological capital contribution. Said license remains active contingent upon the continuation of the marriage. In the event of dissolution, Party B retains the unilateral right to revoke said technological contribution, immediately and without condition. The ballroom went dead silent. A physical, suffocating silence. Even the clinking of silverware stopped entirely. The board of directors stared at the 50-foot screen in abject terror. David's face turned a color Sarah had never seen before. A sickening, translucent gray, like a man experiencing sudden cardiac failure. He took 2 stumbling steps toward the stage. Sarah? She didn't let him speak. She clicked again. Slide 3. The audio file. An audio waveform appeared. She hit play. The ballroom's acoustic system broadcast the recording with pristine clarity. David's voice. Listen, be a good girl. Today is my daughter's birthday. The old man is watching. I have to go back and play the role of the good dad. Tomorrow I'll cancel my panel at the medical symposium, and I'll take you to that exclusive club, wherever you want. Crystal clear. Word for word, hundreds of the most powerful people in Boston heard it simultaneously. Gasps rang out. Some attendees covered their mouths in shock. Others shot sideways glances at their own spouses, thinking, thank God that isn't me. Sitting in his wheelchair near the head table, William Vance Sr., who had discharged himself from the hospital just to attend, heard his son say the words, "The old man is watching," and play the role of the good dad. The patriarch slumped in his chair as if his spine had been removed. There was no rage on his aged face. Only something much worse, absolute, terminal disappointment. Sarah saw the old man's reaction. Her chest tightened briefly, but she didn't stop. If she paused now, it would all be for nothing. David's crisis PR team would spin it. They'd claim the audio was AI-generated deepfake, that she was having a psychotic break, that she needed help. She had to drop the guillotine blade all the way down. Slide 4. The embezzlement. Bank ledgers for the Safe Haven Foundation. What you are looking at is the financial ledger of a charitable entity personally guaranteed by your CEO, David Vance. In less than 3 months since its incorporation, 3 transactions totaling $300,000 were funneled out as fictitious equipment procurement into a shell LLC. She clicked. The LLC's incorporation papers appeared. The registered agent of this LLC is the first cousin of Mr. Vance's executive assistant, Madison. Several major institutional investors stood up from their tables. Their faces were whiter than David's, because this wasn't just a messy divorce anymore. This was federal wire fraud and embezzlement by the CEO of a publicly traded company. David finally snapped. He lunged toward the stage, his voice tearing out of his throat, hoarse and desperate. Turn it off! Cut the screen! He tried to rush the steps to rip the microphone from her hands, but 2 massive men in tailored black suits stepped out of the shadows and blocked his path. Carter Sterling's private security. Sarah, David screamed, restrained at the bottom of the stairs. His eyes were bloodshot, his veins bulging. His eternally flawless mask was utterly destroyed. Are you insane? Do you have any idea what you're doing? Sarah stood at the podium, looking down at him. The stage lights hit her back, casting a long, dark shadow over him. He was trapped at the bottom, held back by guards, looking like a cornered rabid animal. She leaned into the microphone. Her voice was quiet, but it reverberated like thunder. What am I doing? She tilted her head slightly. I am doing exactly what you've been doing for 6 years. I am taking what belongs to me. The only difference is, I don't have to act. David froze. He stared up at her as if looking at a complete stranger. This terrifying, untouchable woman bathed in stage light, with eyes like scalpels, and the woman in the apron who smiled and asked him what he wanted for dinner. He couldn't reconcile them. Sarah. His voice suddenly cracked, shifting gears into desperate pleading. The sympathetic victim protocol. Please, let's talk. Not in front of everyone. Why not in front of everyone? Sarah cut him off, her voice dropping the temperature of the room to absolute 0. You stood in front of everyone and accepted the applause, the accolades, and the unearned glory. Today, in front of everyone, you give it back. She pressed the clicker one last time. Slide 5. The execution. The screen went entirely black. In massive, bold white letters, a single sentence appeared. Impossible to ignore. All exclusive intellectual property rights to the patent. Proud of her. One are here be revoked by the legal owner. Dr. Sarah Crawford. Effective immediately, Vance Medical forfeits all rights to commercialize or develop this asset. The words hung over the ballroom like a death sentence for the entire Vance Medical empire. Sarah watched the faces of the board members and major shareholders drain of all color as they frantically pulled out their phones to text their brokers. The market was closed for the weekend, but the second the bell rang on Monday morning, the stock would trigger a circuit breaker. It would plunge to the floor, and it wouldn't recover. Dr. Crawford? A balding man in his 50s, a major hedge fund manager, stood up, his hands shaking. You can't do this. Sarah's gaze snapped to him. Her tone was eerily calm, almost gentle. Mr. Harrison, 3 years ago, when your fund injected capital into Vance Medical, the due diligence report explicitly detailed how the IP for Protavir one was structured. It clearly stated the flagship patent was tethered to a marital agreement. The hedge fund manager opened and closed his mouth like a suffocating fish. If your analysts failed to brief you on that catastrophic risk, Sarah said coldly, then I suggest you take it up with your risk management department. Not with me. Total paralytic silence reclaimed the room. Sarah placed the clicker down on the acrylic podium. She was done. Every single card was face up on the table, nothing left in her sleeve. She looked down at David one last time. He had stopped struggling against the guards. He stood at the base of the stage like an empty husk, stripped of his bones. His lips trembled, but no sound came out. In his eyes that had once been so arrogant, so relentlessly confident, there was only a vast, terrifying emptiness. An emptiness she had never seen before. It wasn't fury, it wasn't hatred. It was the bewildered terror of a narcissist whose reality has just been shattered. Like an actor who had played the lead role his entire life, only to have the curtain violently ripped down, revealing that there was nothing backstage. No adoring fans, no applause, just a dark, barren wasteland with no way back. Sarah walked down the stairs. She passed right by David. She didn't pause. She didn't look at him. She walked past him as if stepping over a piece of broken furniture on the sidewalk. But just as she brushed past his shoulder, she heard his hoarse, broken whisper. Why? Sarah's steps slowed for half a second. She didn't turn around. Because you forced me to be a prop on your stage for 6 years, she said quietly. Today, I burned your stage to the ground. This isn't revenge, it's an eviction. I am simply repossessing what you borrowed. And she kept walking. When she pushed through the heavy brass doors of the hotel and stepped out onto the street, the crisp Boston autumn air hit her face. The air outside was so incredibly fresh, she wanted to inhale it until her lungs burst. The air inside had been stagnant for 6 years. Her phone buzzed. A text from Carter Sterling. Flawless execution. Car is at the east entrance. Sarah walked around the corner to the east entrance. A dark gray Maybach was idling at the curb. The tinted rear window rolled down a third of the way, revealing Carter's sharp profile. She walked up to the car. Before she could speak, the rear door swung open. Not by the driver. Carter had leaned over and opened it himself. Get in, he said. He didn't ask. How are you? Or are you okay? He could see she was fine. She was more than fine. She was reborn. Sarah slid into the plush leather seat. The cabin smelled faintly of sandalwood. The climate control was set exactly 2 degrees cooler than the outside air. Perfect. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, the chaos, the screaming, and the sheer panic of the ballroom were entirely sealed outside, like hitting the mute button on the world. Carter sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. He didn't rush to speak. And he didn't rush the driver. Sarah leaned her head back against the headrest, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a deep, shuddering breath. Then she opened her eyes and turned to him. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice slightly raspy, not from crying, but from the adrenaline crash after a flawless performance. I need to go somewhere right now. Where? My mother's house in Newton, she said. I want to pick up my daughter. Carter nodded and gave the address to the driver. The Maybach pulled smoothly into traffic. Sarah looked out the window as the city scrolled by. The afternoon sun filtered through the autumn leaves, casting dancing shadows across her face. Her phone began to vibrate violently in her lap. Call after call from David. She looked at his name flashing on the screen, then calmly flipped the phone face down. Let him call. Let him panic. Let him finally understand what it feels like to dial a number over and over, begging for a lifeline, only to be met with dead air. Just like the day of his daughter's birthday, when he sat in a luxury condo with his mistress and put his phone on Do Not Disturb. The car stopped at a red light. Carter suddenly spoke. Your hands are shaking. Sarah looked down at her right hand. It was trembling, a microscopic, high-frequency tremor, barely noticeable. But he had seen it. Adrenaline, she said. Normal physiological response. It will pass. She covered her right hand with her left and squeezed. Carter didn't say anything else. But he reached into the Maybach's chilled console, pulled out a bottle of sparkling water, unscrewed the cap, and placed it in the cup holder right next to her. He didn't hand it to her directly. He placed it where she could take it on her own terms. Thank you. Sarah picked up the bottle and took a slow sip. The icy water slid down her throat, extinguishing the residual fire in her chest. The car merged onto the Mass Pike. She stared out at the highway and suddenly let out a soft chuckle. What is it? Carter asked. Nothing, she said, her eyes still on the horizon. I was just thinking that, starting today, I never have to act for anyone ever again. Carter looked at her profile, bathed in the golden hour light. It's a good look on you, he said quietly. You never needed the mask anyway. The Maybach pulled into the quiet, tree-lined suburban street and stopped in front of her mother's house. Before stepping out, Sarah turned back to Carter. Mr. Sterling, she said. Regarding the spin-off, the new lab space, the partnership, we will discuss the logistics next week. Today, I just want to be a mom. Of course, Carter's voice was warm, a stark contrast to his usual boardroom chill. The timeline is entirely yours. Whenever you're ready. Sarah nodded and stepped out of the car. The moment she rang the doorbell, the frantic patter of little feet echoed from inside. The door flew open, and Lily launched herself into Sarah's legs. Mommy! Mommy's back! Sarah dropped to her knees and scooped her daughter up in a fierce embrace. Lily's hair smelled of strawberry shampoo. Her warm little cheek pressed tightly against Sarah's neck. Sarah closed her eyes and held onto her daughter, anchoring herself to the only thing that truly mattered. Mommy, you look so pretty today. Lily's muffled voice came from her shoulder. Like a movie star. Really, like a superhero. Sarah laughed, a real, genuine laugh. Not the manufactured smile she used to greet her husband in the living room. Not the gentle, reassuring smile she gave her father-in-law in the ICU. But a laugh that erupted from the very bottom of her soul, resonating through every muscle in her body. She stood up, holding Lily, and looked at her mother standing in the doorway. Her mother's eyes were slightly red. She had likely seen the breaking news alerts on her iPad, but she didn't ask a single question. She just reached out, stroked Lily's back, and said, "Come inside, sweetheart. I made your favorite iced tea." Sarah stepped over the threshold. Behind her, the dark gray Maybach idled for a few seconds before gliding silently away down the street. The neighborhood returned to its peaceful silence. Like the ocean after a violent hurricane, the massive, destructive waves had receded into the deep, leaving behind a surface that was clear, boundless, and entirely her own. By 10:00 p.m., Lily was fast asleep in the guest room. Sarah sat on the back patio, a soft cashmere throw draped over her legs. Her phone lay on the glass patio table. The screen lit up periodically. The number of missed calls from David had reached 67. He had also sent over a dozen iMessages. They escalated in panic. From the initial "Are you insane?" to Sarah, "Please, let's just talk," to "I can explain everything," to pick up the phone, "I'm begging you." The final message had arrived 20 minutes ago. "I was wrong." Sarah stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then she locked the screen and set the phone face down. Wrong. What was he wrong about? Was he wrong for cheating? Wrong for stealing her life's work? Wrong for using her as a corporate prop? Or was he just sorry that he got caught? If she hadn't walked onto that stage today, would he have ever thought he was wrong? No. He would have kept playing his game. Playing the good husband, the good dad, the visionary CEO. He would have played it until she grew old, until she outlived her usefulness to his image, and then he would have discarded her with a polite NDA, a patronizing "thank you for the best years of my life," and a humiliating alimony check. He wasn't sorry he was wrong. He was terrified because he had lost. And to a man who had spent his entire life intoxicated by his own superiority, losing is 1,000 times more agonizing than being wrong. Sarah stood up and folded the blanket. The night wind off the Massachusetts woods was cool and crisp. She took a deep breath. Tomorrow, she would have a mountain of work to do. The divorce filings, the brutal legal war over the IP extraction, setting up the new laboratory with Carter. And, hardest of all, figuring out how to explain to Lily that Mommy and Daddy weren't going to live together anymore. None of it would be easy. But she wasn't afraid anymore, because starting today, every single step she took was her own choice, not forced upon her, not manipulated, not written into someone else's script. It was her own path, belonging to no one but her. Sarah closed the patio door and walked back inside. Passing the hallway mirror, she caught her reflection. The makeup was washed off. She was wearing old sweatpants, her hair tied in a messy bun. She looked nothing like the lethal, elegant executioner who had stood on that stage hours ago. But her eyes hadn't changed. They were the same clear, unshakable eyes that no longer needed to search for validation in anyone else's gaze. She smiled at her reflection. "Good night," she whispered to herself.